joining us today. This is our PEDS webinar, and we're going to be talking about addressing treatment challenges. Dr. Tony Salerno is here today to talk to us about addressing treatment challenges in regards to decision support with our clients. Thank you, Dr. Salerno, for being here today.
Okay, thanks very much, Karen. Welcome to everyone who's participating and attending today. We really want to zero in on one of the most really common and challenging experiences that we have. Anyone who's been in a clinical role with children or adults, but really in this field, is what to do when you're experiencing some significant challenges with respect to treatment. And then how can the MAP resource, the decision support tool, and in what way can it be used to help? And so we wanted to really explore that area, and that'll be our focus for today. So let's get rolling. Let me see. Okay, I'm trying to. Doesn't seem to get folks to just hang in there. I'm trying to go. Okay, here we go. Here's the agenda. Just a quick learning community updates. The decision support for challenging problem areas, thinking through the decision-making process and how MAP can help. So here's, just before we get started, just a review of what our schedule is like. Today, of course, is listed as February 18th. We will have a group check-in call on Tuesday, March 11th, and the purpose is really to have a number of organizations on at the same time to kind of like share what their experiences are. And this is also a chance for us to really better understand the challenges of using this type of decision support tool in day-to-day practice. Wednesday, we'll be looking at the core components of effective treatment for children with conduct problems. That's going to be a webinar. Followed again in April with the group check-in call. And really our final, wrap-up to just collect all the experiences, recommendations of everyone who's participated, so that we are in a position to make a recommendation to the Office of Mental Health with respect to, what components of the MAP system are really practical tools for practitioners to use on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so we also want to just mention something about the PEDS certificate. We want to also acknowledge the efforts that folks have put in. And we're thinking really based on what folks are experiencing out there, that this has really been, for many, it's a challenge. This is really a significant effort to adopt and to implement the MAP system that will have a basic certificate that just recognizes that folks, have been able to apply what is some of the most challenging aspects of the MAP system, which is the dashboard. So if you're able to submit 2 completed dashboards, we do just want to acknowledge that with the basic certificate. But others might want to go a little further and with the certificate with distinction, where in addition to the 2 dashboards, participation in at least 8 webinars, either live when they're occurring, as well as the archive. And that'll also go into the efforts that would be recognized through a certificate with distinction. And it must include either a webinar on that we presented in December on clinical decision making or today's. And you can access all the webinars from the PEDS resource page. And we'll have emails out to folks just to remind them of that as well. So let's go on to our major topic for today. So the MAP system really comes down to a set of tools for treatment planning, problem solving, and progress monitoring. Every one of you, all of us who've ever been clinicians, we're constantly needing to make decisions and adjustments along the way. And what helps us to make those decisions? And the MAP system was designed to be a resource tool for practitioners. So these decision support tools, as the PWebs and the MAP, could be employed in a variety of situations. Now, when we started out with the PEDS project, we thought it would be most practical and least burdensome to clinicians to really, to work with some specific clinical problem areas: depression, anxiety, trauma, and conduct problems. And so that was our original approach. But of course, as we had mentioned in the very beginning of this, this is not a static model. We're field testing this and getting feedback from participants is the kind of information that we use to make adjustments, based on that feedback. So some of the feedback, folks were struggling a little bit to find clients who kind of fit that diagnostic, category. So the suggestion was that we would focus not so much on a specific group, but really the first 30 days of any client. Just start out with a client who just is a newly admitted client, because the MAP system, it goes beyond those 4 clinical problem areas and has a whole host of the most, common problems that folks encounter in children's mental health services. And to really zero in on how do you use it from like day one. Now we're really working on revisiting a treatment plan in a process where the progress is stalled or getting worse. And all of us know what that is about, where it just seems to be stuck, or things that really seem to be going in a negative direction. And so that's an important decision point. In fact, it may be one of the most critical decision points for any clinician. And so what do? So you either can talk to a colleague and explain what you're encountering, and maybe they have some ideas. You can speak to a supervisor, and perhaps they have some ideas of what to do. The other is the MAP system. How can we use really a compilation of research findings that may also be a source of information so that you can begin to re-examine and revisit the entire treatment process and to perhaps come up with some strategies to kind of get things back on track. So we want to just start out with a very quick kind of poll question. And when you think about it, how often do you find that treatment is just not really moving and achieving the desired results? And this is sort of like just a guess check in your own mind. You find that like maybe half the clients that you work with, gee, it's either kind of gets stuck or it's not really like moving in the right direction, or would you say, no, it's more like between 25 and 50% of the clients that I've worked with, or generally it's really less than 25% where it's just not moving to achieve the goals that we had established. So we just want to get a little sense of what folks are experiencing out there. So if you would just pick either A, B, or C, give you a moment for that. And that'll just give us a little bit of a clue of what folks' experiences have been. Okay, so generally it's somewhere between 25 and 50%. And actually, when I think about my own experience working with adults, I would say that sounds right to me as well. So many, especially when you're working with folks in complex situations, which is one of the things that we hear, is because of complexity, you have more challenges and trying to get the treatment back on track. And that's really our focus for today. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Evelyn, do I have to get out of this? Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so let's chat now. Now we really want to just pick your brain a little bit. And if you use the chat box for this, in your experience, what do you think are the most common reasons why treatment outcomes are less than desired? You can put in more than one answer. When you just sort of reflect on, gee, when clinical goals have not been accomplished, what's been the reason for when you reflect on that? And it's not always a single reason, but you want to type in 2, 3, or more ideas that you have. We just want to really tap your brain right now for what contributes to treatment either being stalled or declining. I'm not able to actually see the chat box, so I'm relying on some of my colleagues.
If you'd like to raise your hand and participate, we could also take your answers that way. I'm not seeing any chats either, but we'd love to hear from you.
Give folks a moment. I really would you can just type in one thing. One reason why. Yeah, go ahead.
We have one from Michaela. She said environmental factors distract clients from goals or shift their identified primary problem.
Okay, so that there's the context in which clients are living can sort of like it can contribute to a sort of a loss of focus on the core clinical problem.
Amanda said people are not. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, go ahead.
Amanda said people are not ready to change.
Right. So the issue of like motivation and readiness to change, isn't that like one of the most critical issues that we all face as clinicians? And so, how do and folks have to put energy into it so that if they don't, then, or they're not ready, then folks don't really move along. So it's the issue of motivation. It's a very important one. Anything else coming up?
And Jackie also chimed in and made reference to motivation as well. She said, I believe it is hard for folks to make change and perhaps they lose interest in their desires.
Okay. So just some of the emotional energy, the overall planning effort to make some changes to overcome some habits and to learn new things or to deal with unfamiliar situations, that is a challenge as well. Okay, anything else coming in?
No, that's it.
Okay, great. So we're going to, there isn't any simple answer to those types of like challenges. And as all of you know, the complexity of the work that we do does not lend itself to easy answers. So what we're going to be looking at, today is the way in which one could use MAP that is at least increase the likelihood of engaging clients, motivating clients, keeping a focus on the treatment, and many other. If we had more time, I'm sure we could generate a whole list of some of the factors that contribute to individuals not moving along. We're going to try to look at those factors that we're most in control of, as practitioners. And so we'll move on to that area. Okay, so if you have a stalled or declining treatment process, here's some issues to think through. The decision-making process, like what do I do now? And so one is the problem of diagnosis. So have we really assessed the problem correctly? If it's not, if the diagnostic picture or the assessment of what is going on, we don't have the total picture, then that's going to perhaps contribute to sort of a misalignment, really, with what is actually the challenges and what we're focusing on. Have we assessed the strengths of the family? Now, that's another issue. Sometimes we can be zeroing in, and this certainly resonates with my experience in working with adults with really very serious mental health problems, is that one can often get very much caught in looking at the pathology and the weaknesses and the limitations, and less on trying to mobilize and identify the strengths. So that could be an issue. These are just really questions for us to ask ourselves when we're encountering these situations. And if we assess and address the practical barriers that may disrupt the treatment process, that may make it more difficult for people to, to come to treatment, to be able to follow up with recommendations and things like that. Then there's the possible problem of the practitioner-caregiver or child misalignment. In terms of the engagement process, is there a discrepancy between the treatment plan aims and really what it is that these caregivers or child really care about? So that issue of misalignment can also contribute to a stalled or declining process. Are there cultural values, beliefs, and preferences that have not been taken, into account? Again, that's just another factor that may contribute to a misalignment. Again, these are just issues to think about and to consider, and it offers an opportunity then for what do we do? So if there is misalignment, then what are the strategies to try to get things back into alignment? Have we used the right approaches in treatment intervention? That's the other piece of it, is, in the selection of what am I going to do with this caregiver and child where there's maybe anxiety or depression or there's conduct difficulties or there's, attentiveness, poor learning problems, out of control behavior, all the various problems that you guys encounter on a day-to-day basis. So have I selected the right approaches and treatment interventions, particularly those that really the literature suggests ought to be considered when you're working with a child with particular mental health difficulties. And then if we have some of the right interventions, let's say, yeah, I'm looking at the research and I've used the MAP system and here are 3 of the elements that I need to use. Then the other issue is, well, have I really applied it with a high level of skill? So that has to do with the fidelity to a particular practice. For someone could certainly say, listen, I use a cognitive therapy approach to help a person address some of the negative thinking around depression. And then the question is, well, how do you actually do that? And are the strategies aligned with the way in which that practice or intervention needs to be implemented? So those could be some of the issues. So in question 1, have we used the right approaches and treatment interventions? So reviewing the diagnosis thoroughly, how is that made? Who is involved in contributing to the final diagnosis? And so that's the diagnostic issue, because the diagnosis really forms the framework for what you do. Review the core clinical problem has been the focus of treatment. So how did we come to the conclusion that we really needed to zero in on a particular problem? There could be a number of problems in this problem list, but which one is the high priority one that we want to address? How do we actually begin? And how is this determined? And is this core clinical problem area that the practitioner has been addressing, is it endorsed by the child and caregiver? That's the issue of alignment again. So that, a practitioner may be conceptualizing the problem in a particular way, but the child and the caregiver sees it in a very different way. So those, again, these are just questions to ask oneself as one is going through this decision-making process to better understand a stalled or declining treatment process, and then what can we do about it. Have we used the right approaches and treatment interventions? So reviewing the interventions and the approaches. What interventions have already been tried? Now we're going to go into some of the tools that are part of the MAP system, which is this dashboard, which, folks sometimes struggle with, making the best use of that dashboard. But what we'll go through, though, is how that dashboard helps to answer a few questions. Trying to keep track, of what we're actually doing and when we did it, and how often did we do it, and what was the whole variety of things we tried. Usually it's not so easy to sort of like keep track of that unless one goes right back into like we're looking at old progress notes and things like that. But a dashboard can be a way of getting a quick summary of what interventions have already been tried. The other is there a way to measure progress on the critical clinical problems? And that really has to do with monitoring progress. Like, how do we know things aren't moving in the right direction? What was our baseline? Where are things are? Is it really just stuck? Is it declining? Are there indicators of some areas that are improving but others are not? So again, a dashboard is sort of a graphic and summarized way to answer that question. Or have we been just consumed by the herd of cows? And folks remember, cows stand for crisis of the week. Have we been able to stay focused, or do we meander from one crisis or problem to another, putting out many different small brush fires? I certainly experienced a great deal of this when I was working clinically with adults with serious mental health problems. It just seemed that every week there was like another issue. And, down the road, you can go down the road months later, and the initial focus of treatment that was bringing the individual into treatment in the first place can sometimes be lost. And then these crises seem to always be unending, right? They just kind of like, if it isn't one thing, it'll be another thing. And perhaps that may be contributing to the fact that we've kind of gotten stuck, or actually the core focus of the treatment is declining because we just haven't really zeroed in on it. We haven't focused on it. We haven't provided, in a sense, the right dosage of intervention with the right duration. So again, the dashboard helps us to kind of, summarize that and helps us to identify whether or not that may be a contributing factor. In terms of applying the intervention skillfully, the possible problems, right? So the dosage and duration, the dashboard enables one to look at missed appointments, or maybe there's a lack of follow-through with various action steps or homework. And how MAP may help on the right side is really to review that dashboard. The order of the common elements, the interventions, what have we used and what order have we used them? Again, to review the dashboard, the P-Web system, the treatment plan, and these are just some of the tools in MAP that can be used to, again, diagnose whether or not part of what may be contributing to stalled process is that what we've been using, the order we've been using it, the way we've conceptualized the treatment planning may really need to be revisited and revised. Then the fidelity to intervention and practice guides. This is something that we know from folks who've been participating, that those practice guides are usually valued by clinicians. They like having it. And then the issue is, translating those practice guides into actual practice and ensuring that there's pieces have not been left out, that the core elements that are part of the practice guideline is adhered to. And then adapting the intervention in a way that maintains the active ingredients. That's another issue around the practice guide, to be really clear about how the practice is to be implemented. What are the critical components? So that when you make adaptations, you may not deviate so far away from the practice. And you'll often need to make adaptations in a way to ensure that the caregiver and the child are engaged, that it makes sense to them, and also some elements that they be willing to, sort of follow up on, and others that they may not. But the practice guides offer you a pretty good picture of what the core critical active ingredients are, and in reviewing it, it can also tell you whether you've either deviated from that or you've just had a variation. And so variations keep you within fidelity, deviation does not. So MAP, in terms of how it helps, it provides a way to ensure that the entire menu of treatments that have been associated with positive outcomes is available to you, so that you don't have to just rely on your own memory or rely on practices that you just developed over the years, but that it again expands the menu of possibilities. It also assists you to review the components of a practice so that key steps have not been left out. It's not always so easy to sort of like remember, okay, I'm going to use an exposure sort of strategy with this particular kid, or I'm going to use a cognitive approach to really address the underlying self-defeating thoughts associated with the anxiety, or I'm going to help look at the issue of self-control and self-monitoring for a kid who has some conduct problems. And so what are the steps that are involved in that? So it helps to provide some guide so that you're not, a clinician doesn't feel like they're just flying by the seat of their pants or having to rely on their memory about the key steps of the practice. And then it helps by focusing the treatment in a way that promotes an effective dose and duration, of treatment. And particularly the issue around crises that come up and how that gets handled. So the tools, of course, and this is really just a review, is there is a treatment planner to kind of get a sense of what is your overall big plan, right? The overall strategy of how we're going to start out this treatment, what we're going to do in terms of the middle of this the treatment, and then how do we actually end this, and how do we end it in a way so that it seems like a satisfying and productive experience for everyone involved. Then there's the planning of each particular session, and again, it's a tool that helps folks to kind of, before you even enter a session, to have like a plan. And sometimes, in busy schedules where you have a lot of clients to see, one may just be jumping from one to the other, and it isn't as if one has a specific plan in mind when you're going to work with a child and or caregiver. So the session planner is a way of kind of structuring that planning process so that you're not finding yourself just kind of like winging it when you're seeing a child and a caregiver. Again, you may have other ways that you do this, but the session planner is a tool to help to guide that outline. The T-Web to identify best practices, what are some of the best practices for a particular problem. It supports fidelity as well. And then the dashboard, the folks who developed the map system, they really were constantly emphasizing the importance of the dashboards. And the notion here was that what dashboards do is that it helps to monitor progress, establishing a baseline. How do you know when treatment ends? A lot of times treatment ends because people just stop showing up, or something happens in their lives and they stop showing up. Or, for some, there's a considerable number of folks who come to maybe the first or second session and don't really follow up from there. So this whole area of having an understanding of like where we are and then where we're heading and how do we monitor that progress over time is viewed as an important part of keeping folks engaged, focused. And that there's the notion that it helps in terms of like motivation, because a person has a clear sense of what we're trying to accomplish. It can build a sense of we can really get there, that there is self-efficacy, right? That the practitioner has an idea of what to do. Again, it's just building a sense of hopefulness and confidence that there really is a plan here, and it can build a person's sense of we can actually make something happen. That can help around the issue of people's readiness for change, because one thing that gets in the way of a person's readiness to change is simply not believing that change is possible. And it's really up to us as practitioners to view change as both positive, but also really possible. And that's an area that's extremely important that often gets lost, is how do we ensure that we can contribute and add to a person's readiness and motivation. But one factor is there are strategies we use to help an individual see that change is not just positive, but that it's really possible. And the idea of a dashboard with baseline, with having some specific goals that we're looking at, that we're going to monitor progress over time, we're going to make changes and adjustments accordingly, is the idea here is that it does help to build a person's confidence in change. So we have also the treatment plan, and these should be familiar to you, that we, as we go through it, where just, it's a way of just summarizing some of the key issues around diagnosis, objectives, and then how we're going to begin treatment. What are the other stressors? These are the factors that are going on around that individual, right? The difficulties in maybe some in family life, the home situation, things in school, other stressors that may be taking place around healthcare problems of folks in the family, other siblings. You can just think about the whole range of stressors that are oftentimes a part of people's lives. And just to be acknowledged and to be understood, that's the context in which all of this is happening. It isn't as if the only stressor or difficulty that the child or caregiver is experiencing is the problem that's bringing them into treatment at this time. There are other things going on, but one cannot sort of remove all the stresses in a person's life, and it's very easy to get focused on a lot of those stressors through these day-to-day kinds of crises and lose sight of the core clinical problem that is bringing this kid, into treatment. At the same time, they need to be addressed. They need to be understood. Practitioners can make recommendations around how to address some of those other stressors, to reach out and mobilize other resources that could be available to a family, whether it's from financial stresses, housing issues, and other problems that may be going on. And then there's the idea of what are the practice elements and the discharge criteria. When do we know that this level of care is no longer needed? So now the session planner, this is something that has been developed by the MAP system. I'm sure you've seen this before. Again, this is sort of a quick review of what to think about before the session, during the session, and then, after the session. And essentially during that session, the notion of identifying the strains, checking on what the person did during the week. And in this way, the checking is a little bit different. Checking is not simply, so how does it, what's going on? how did the past week go? That's a cow question. That's like, tell me about the crisis of the week. The other is, tell me about the action steps that you were planning to take, no matter how small, during the week. And that's what we're really going to be focusing on. If one begins to focus on the various crises that have happened, you could spend literally months and months and months and months just going over, each different kind of crisis that comes up. So the idea here is to not, again, lose sight of the core problem. And because if we lose sight of that core problem, then it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to provide the kind of interventions with the right duration and dosage that's likely to make a difference. And then, of course, the working to advising, instructing, guiding, rehearsing, repeating, that's really where the practice guides come in. And then the closing is to really review what's gone on and to help to bridge between this session and the next session. And this notion of assigning homework or suggesting some action steps and ensuring that whatever the action step is, no matter how small it is, but it is something that the caregiver and the child, involve the child and caregiver, that they feel comfortable doing. And nothing is going to be more powerful than a successful application of an action step. That is, again, another motivating sort of strategy, and it helps to build confidence so that a caregiver and child say, coming to this therapist and receiving this service is likely to really help me and really work for me. Okay. This session planner was designed by us to be a little bit more detailed, and you have that available. Again, it's another tool that we make. So we kind of exploded a little bit more the before, during, and after session, so there's a little bit more detail. Now that you guys are familiar with the database, again, this helps us to go from our conceptualization of the core clinical problem to what does the research say we ought to consider as an intervention to address those problems. Okay, and this tells you the practice elements, and there, just as a reminder, it tells you of all the studies that have been done, in this clinical area for children. If you take them all, what percentage of those studies used exposure, as one of the common elements. Here you'll see for, anxiety, there's exposure, relaxation, cognitive approaches. Cognitive just really comes down to exploring some of the negative thinking that's holding this person back or contributing to their symptoms. Psychoeducation, explaining things to the child and to the caregiver, to the self-monitoring. You kind of go down the list. But if you start from the top, that'll tell you something, that this was an element that was considered so important that it was being included in all of the studies. And so that's not a bad place to begin. Those top 2 or 3 ought to be a core set of interventions. So if you were finding that you're working with a kid with there's a lot of anxiety, or that was at least one of the areas you were addressing, and you were to say, just isn't working so well, and you go back to the MAP system and you look up anxiety again, and it says, this exposure thing, I just don't think I've been doing it very much. I've been having a hard time really being able to explain what that is. Let me go back to the practice guide around exposure, and let me see what the elements include. And let me think about how I might be able to use that to address this kid's fearfulness, about going to school, or his fearfulness to go out and play with his friends, or whatever it might be. Let's see if that's a possibility. Again, that's going to be based upon how you assess what's contributing to these fearful reactions on the part of the child. Maybe let me take a look at relaxation. Do I do anything around relaxation? Have I tried it? What are the techniques that I use around relaxation? Gee, that's not something I'm very familiar with. How long what do I actually do in a session? How do I introduce it to the caregiver and to the child? And what part of relaxation is going to make sense to them? So it just, again, these are not like very formulaic, simple answers to complex questions. It is not. But it helps to guide decision-making, and that's what this is all about, is a decision support process. And you guys are familiar with that, and this can very much help you when you've really been stuck or things aren't going well. The practice guides, you guys are pretty familiar with that. Here's just an example of it. Again, if you were using, let's say you were using problem solving, said, okay, that's one of my interventions. So what the heck does that mean? So I can go down and look at some of the key steps that are involved. And you could say, you know what, I've been trying to teach this problem solving, but I just missed some of these elements. And so let me just kind of go back on, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take those 5 steps and I'm going to have a sheet that has them, and I'm going to share it with the caregiver and the child. So just so that it really is a focus for us. And then I want the caregiver to go away with this in hand, like their own problem-solving, you know, sort of like process, and thinking of solutions, examining each one, going through the pros and cons. You know, these are common problem-solving approaches. But it could be that when you revisit it, you may say, gee, I may have missed a couple of these steps, or really we haven't done much with, you know, trying it out in real life. And we did try to do it, but then when the person came back, but they had a crisis, we forgot about the action step or the homework, and we just started talking about the crisis that had been, you know, that had come up. And so maybe that's what's going on, is that we're not able to focus enough and follow through on the core problem or on the intervention that I've selected. So you have a, you know, checklist of things, there's some details, and so that's the practice guide. Now, we also have the clinical dashboard. So let me just kind of remind folks, you know, of this. And again, the developers of the MAP system, they really believe very strongly that this is a critically important issue. But this is also not something that's so easy to kind of put together. And some people are very comfortable with using Excel and putting in like numbers. Others are less comfortable with that. But in any event, this tool was really designed so that it would establish some baselines and help to monitor progress, and also to keep track on what it is that folks are actually doing. And again, the top portion, usually you're selecting at least two measures. One measure is a standardized measure, you know, from standardized means that it's been used, like developed in research, and it covers a number of topic areas. The idiographic is what seems to be most important to the caregiver. It's like the unique performance indicator. And for the caregiver, you know, what really is most disturbing is I get calls every day from the school. For me, if we went you know, a week without getting any calls, that would be like huge. That's what I'd really like to address. Or, you know, my kid doesn't want to come down to have dinner, throws a fit, then he doesn't want to, and it becomes, the dinner time becomes like hell. And so what I really want to do is I would love to see that we can have dinner together and no emotional outbursts and, you know, that kind of thing. Or some other issue that, again, is a high priority, a strong felt need on the part of the caregiver and the child. So that would be the idiographic. And having both of these, standardized and idiographic, will give you a way of monitoring whether the treatment is going in the right direction, being kind of getting stuck, or actually declining. So there's the progress, there's the practices. Just to remind you there, on the left-hand side on the bottom where there are all the blue stripes, that's the list of all the various practices. And the dots then is how you indicate which practice you use in that particular session. And so the pattern of dots can be very revealing. It can, again, tell a story. And it can tell a story in such a way that gives you some insight into what might be contributing to this stalled treatment process or declining treatment process. So let's walk through some planners and dashboards of cases that have become stalled in treatment. And I want you to put your thinking caps on, then use the chat box to type in what you see could be contributing to the stall in treatment. So I'm going to just show you, I'm going to share this, I hope this works. I'm going to share with you a dashboard, and we're going to ask you to kind of analyze it and say, what does this tell you? What's the story in this dashboard that gives you a clue as to what may be contributing to a stalled or declining treatment process, and that also recommends what we might need to do a little bit differently. So I'm going to share my desktop with you. And let's see if this, I hope this works. Okay, so the first thing, okay, so I'm going to just rely on my colleagues to tell me whether they see this screen.
Yes, yes, we see it.
Okay, great, great. So what is this telling us? All right, so here you have the blue line is the RCAD. That's a standardized measure with the anxiety subscale. This is a problem with the female who has anxiety, and we look at the RCAD, and we can see that, you know, over a number of really months, there hasn't really been much change. That's the blue line. The idiographic measure, or the client-specific one, is their rating. You know, so kids could have like a rating of each day indicating, you know, how this day I would say my anxiety or fearfulness or nervousness on a scale of 1 to 10 was 5. The Tuesday it was like 9. On Wednesday it was 10. You know, that kind of thing. And person monitors, and you take an average of that. And what you would want, of course, to see is that you ask the kid, well, you know, when you think about your nervousness today or anxiety or worry, you know, how do you sum it up? And you'd want that kid to begin to say things like 3 or 2 and do that for like weeks where the, you know, the person is really not having these episodes of like anxiety, right? Or there's been very, very, you know, few of them. You want to see a decline in that, of course. So you look at that and you say, well, you know, gee, I don't know, this is really not going very, very far. And these numbers here are, you know, pretty much indicate there hasn't been much of a change. So you say, all right, my measures are telling me, both measures are telling me things aren't going in a great direction. So then let me take a look at this dashboard. Now, these are all the different types of skill areas across all clinical topics, right? In a way, this tells you the whole set of practices that if a practitioner knew how to do all of these things, that would be one heck of a practitioner in terms of their core competencies, because these represent like 95% of the interventions that are employed to address the host of clinical problems that are addressed in mental health clinics with children. So let's take a look here. So we see is person has done psychoeducation, child psychoeducative education, engagement, and they keep doing that, right? But they have all these gaps over here, and then they keep. It seems that two things are always used, right? You can see that's what these dots represent. Okay, so if you could just in the chat box, what story does this does this tell you? And is there any suggestion you might have if a practitioner came to you and said, hey, look, let me show you this dashboard. This is what's going on. I've tracked what I've been doing and the progress, and this is how it sorts itself out. You know, what your recommendation might be. So either put it in the chat box, or if you want to state something, you can just raise your hand, and then we can have you unmuted, and you can just share some of your ideas. So what does this tell you?
So I'm going to chime in for a second, everyone. If you click on viewing the desktop, you can click on it, or it drags down. There's a chat, a little bubble, and you can click that to chat to us.
Just give it a minute. We're not sure if this will work so easily, but we'll give it a try. Again, just take a look. What do you observe? What may be contributing? So you put on your diagnostic hat, what may be contributing to the fact that things aren't moving along so well? Anybody type in anything?
No, not yet.
Okay. Okay. This might be a little bit, I kind of gave a little bit of it away, I think. But maybe, you know what, let me kind of go through this a little bit just to kind of remind folks of what the dashboard really includes. So let me explain this. We have two other dashboards that will help you to ask you to analyze. Anything coming in?
No, nothing on either of our ends.
Okay, why don't I just use this as, yeah.
Go ahead. I think we can go ahead and figure out something else for the next one.
Sure, sure. But what I want to kind of like point out here, and reading this may not always be so easy, but what you notice is, you know, these are days in here, all right, and these, so the 20 days, 40 days. There's a lot of gaps. When you see a lot of these gaps, that means that the caregiver and the job, they're missing a lot of appointments. And it's this erratic attendance that is maybe contributing. Now, that might be one of the more obvious things. And what happens is, because of the erratic attendance, missed appointments, the practitioner finds him or herself going back to educating the caregiver and the child, and then engaging. It's almost like we have to restart every time that we meet. And this is one where the practitioner may want to just say, you know what, we have to kind of move beyond just engagement and psychoeducation, and it may be contributing to persons not showing up because it doesn't seem that all that satisfying that we're making much progress. So it just at least gives you an idea of, gee, what have I been doing? These gaps of attendance clearly will have an effect on the treatment outcomes. So again, this is one of the most kind of like a simple observation, but it can be very helpful in saying, what do I need to do? And also, this is the kind of thing that could be presented to the caregiver and child, and as that, you know, I'm just not monitoring myself, but we have to be monitoring things. And to point out that this is what we really need to start doing to address anxiety is to have some ideas, but it would be very important for us to kind of see how we're getting a little stuck and how attendance may be contributing to this. So it could be something also shared and may be helpful. Okay, let me share another dashboard. And again, things aren't going so hot, right? This is again anxiety, same kind of like measure. You can see that they're pretty much stuck here. You really want to see lines going way down, and both lines, the purple and the blue, but they're not. But you go look down and you say, okay, so what has this practitioner been doing? So based upon this, if we'd ask folks to chat in there, what do you observe? What hits you when the practitioner came to you and said, this is my dashboard, all right, this is what I've been doing. So what do you think? What would come to mind if you were the supervisor or a colleague that a person was asking you for your thoughts because they're concerned that treatment is not going very well? But this is what their dashboard looks like. So I'll just give you a moment. You guys could just type in your analysis of this dashboard. Kara, anything coming in?
We have someone who responded by saying it looks like they're doing a lot of different practices with the family.
Right. That's really, really good. It just can be that there's just all over the place. And during a period of a session, you know, trying 5, 6, 7 things, again, can be just sort of like it can feel like we're just meandering from one thing to another, jumping from one thing to another. losing sight, and there just is too much going on. So it also could mean that we're not really zeroing in on the treatment. I'm using different practices because I'm really dealing with cows. I'm dealing with crises that come up. So if this crisis comes up, then I'm going to use a little bit of this. And a different crisis comes up, then I use a little bit of that. And it can just be like all over the place. So this can be, again, telling a story. You can almost get a feel for what might be actually happening in these sessions, that there's just way too much, because it may lack what is sufficient dosage of an intervention so that you can really, zero in, have the kind of focus, and likely to help that caregiver and child address the problem that they're looking to address. The practice is simply not being provided for long enough.
Mm-hmm.
So
Michaela's response was two parts. She said, a lot of practice elements per session. How are they doing all these things effectively? So great, great question.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Is that, to do something well around like exposure, that could be the focus of an entire session. To really plan that out well, to develop what the strategies would be, to ensure that the family feels comfortable with that, to develop an action step that folks are comfortable with. I mean, so, you can certainly see educating is often a part of it. And so if you see educating, psychoeducation throughout a lot of the meetings, that makes perfect sense, because educating the caregiver and the child about the intervention and what the focus is often just a, sort of a staple of good practice. But to have all of these things going on, as Michaela said, it's hard to really implement the practice in a meaningful way. Okay, so let me just show you one more. And I'm aware of the time, so I may just kind of go through this with you. Okay, so this is one in which your standardized measure is telling you things are going the right direction, but the kid's experience, the individual measure, the behavioral measure, right, is going the opposite direction. So you have like two measures, right? And so that could be an interesting thing. Say, oh, what's going on over here? And you can then see that there has been really a focus on, the caregiver psychoeducation, around anxiety, on child education. They're using, some practices for a period of time. There isn't too much that's going on. However, there's a pretty, this pattern looks pretty decent in terms of the selection of practice areas, so you get a sense of what the beginning of treatment, the middle, and then where you're planning for relapse prevention. But the scales are off, right? The measures seem to be a little off. So let me just share with you some thoughts about that. I'm going to just stop because we're running out of time on this one. So I'm going to stop sharing the desktop around that and just get to maybe saying a little bit about that. So you may encounter that situation, and so what may be going on? Let me see here. Okay, so let me just go on. We just have a few minutes, so I'm going to go beyond this here. This is just the point that we've already made. When there's what can be contributing to the stall in treatment is, if you look at secondary diagnosis or issues, a lot of parental conflict, parent-child conflict, behavioral issues, but the focus is really on anxiety, and what you find is that all these other sorts of stressors and issues, can be occupying the treatment, and a loss and deviation from a focus on the mental health issues. And that can certainly, happen where some of these stressors become then the focus. The problem, of course, is that as the stresses become the focus, there's a deviation really. And you may want to step back and say, gee, maybe what really we've identified as a stressor is in fact the core clinical problem. And then you kind of review that and say, look, we're really spending a lot of our time, on these stressors, and perhaps our conceptualization of the clinical problem has been off. Okay, so I do want to get on to the piece about, when the measures say different things. So if you have a situation where that occurs, the same thing, whether improving or worsening, have the same perception. So the opposite thing is the misperception on either provider or family side. So when things line up, the standardized measure and idiographic, that's fine. So what do you do? And it could mean that you have to just revisit the measure that was selected. Make sure that the idiographic, the client-specific measure, what the family goals are, that you really have that right. Instead of just measuring the right goal or the goal has really changed. So is that really the area that's of high priority to folks? And then also is the standardized measures tapping into the right problem. So these are just questions that one asks, rather than think that there's some weird kind of clinical discrepancy kind of going on. It can certainly be in the measures themselves, and to revisit, those measures if you find that. So with the review, you can, when we really summarize this whole thing, how MAP can be used, it's a way of trying to ensure that the practices, that you've selected the right practices, assuming that you have the right diagnosis. If the conceptualization of the clinical picture is off, then everything else that follows will be off. So that process is a very important one, and that really goes beyond the scope of, the MAP system. MAP system is not an assessment system. It starts with, once you have an understanding of the core clinical problem, and then it really supports the treatment decision. So you can see what are the most common practice elements, the treatment planner again, the session planner that you can be using again to focus. The dashboard, we already went through how that can be helpful in telling the story about what treatment has actually been provided, assessing that progress, and then incorporating caregivers in the process through discussion of the dashboard so that it's really very transparent. We all kind of know what we're working on. We're monitoring this. We're going to keep a close eye on how we're doing, and we don't want to find ourselves spending 6, 7 months for clients who, even if there's erratic attendance, who are coming to this, but we really haven't throughout that process built in any way for us to have a way of monitoring this in a shared way, that we've agreed on certain things that we wanted to see improved. So we're pretty much out of time, but the PEDS schedule, if you have any other questions, you can certainly email that to us. We're going to have our call in March, so if there are any issues and questions around this that you want to discuss in real detail, you can also email us if you want to have a phone consultation related to any of these issues as well. And again, this is just a reminding around the PEDS schedule that's upcoming and our contact information if you wish to either email us some questions or really anything you want to discuss with us. So thanks so much, folks, for attending. We really very much appreciate that, appreciate your contribution to this, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks so much.